we have to see that none of these things are in here. Tectonic plates, I've heard all these things, right? None of this is in the book, so we have to be very careful how we handle the book. So let's approach it with caution. And anything else, Mike, I know there is, before we jump in here, that we want to be aware of?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think one of the keys there's several keys to understanding Revelation. One of them is to take the time text literally. Words like near, soon, and hand, quickly, really mean near, soon, at hand, and quickly. They don't require a smoke and mirrors interpretation. So that's one key. The second one is, like you were saying, Revelation is about 2/3 quotes from or allusions from the Old Testament. So you have to use Scripture to interpret Scripture. You've got to look at the Old Testament and see how these things were used in order to understand how they're being used in the book of Revelation. And yes, Revelation was written in about 65 A.D. An excellent book, if you want to research that, is Kenneth Gentry's book, Dating the Fall of Jerusalem, Dating the Book of Revelation by Kenneth Gentry.
Yeah, and also our friend James Ellis, The Last Days Are Left Behind, has a section, I believe a chapter on when the date of Revelation. So you have to really dig into some details of internal and external evidence there, and I think we might do some of that. Before we do that, I'll give a couple quotes just to know that I've got about 150 scholars, top scholars, that make the claim it's written prior to 70 A.D. So has been a debate, and it seems that since the futurist view is more popular in our day, the majority of scholars will say, "Oh, sure, it's written, after 70 A.D." But as recently, recently is 1893. Philip Schaff says the early date of Revelation is now accepted by perhaps a majority of scholars. So this has been a debate. Has gone back and forth this way and that way, but different scholars believe it. Again, somebody who's a strong futurist, Isaac Newton, right, would not have any preterist bias, right, to say this was written prior to 70 A.D., yet he does, right? Isaac Newton says it's written because of the Jewish appeal. Again, there was no real Jewish, it uses Jewish words again and again, right? In the Hebrew, it means this, right? And what we just explained about the number of the beast is identified through the Hebrew lettering system. So again, there's a Jewish appeal, and that's why people like Isaac Newton would say that. You're what is that? Trying to think of the concordance where the man is. I just know it by the name of the concordance, but the guy there, and I'll remember it in a minute. But he has the same reason why he sees. Robert Young is his name. Young's translation, I believe, comes from that.
Young's literal, yeah.
And so what we want to understand is that he believes in the early date. F.W. Farrar, again, 150 scholars here. Adam Clark, Moses Stewart, Milton Terry, John Lightfoot, go on in our day, R.C. Sproul, Hank Hanegraaff, Kenneth Gentry, Steve Gregg. And again, one of the reasons is because the debate is over external evidence by a quote by Irenaeus, right? Who, I don't have the quote in front of me, but there's a debate of even if he's talking about Revelation, but he says it was seen in the days of the Emperor Domitian, right? That's a paraphrase of the quote, but it's an unclear quote, and he says during the days of Domitian, John was seen on the island of Patmos, right? So that's why they think, okay, so it's a late date, because that was Domitian was in the 90s, right? But the problem is it's an unclear quote whether they're speaking of John or the book of Revelation. It says it was seen, right? It's not clear if it's he or it. That's all external evidence, right? And most of the weight is internal evidence, but with that external evidence, there's more evidence where I believe it's the Syriac version of the book of Revelation says John was exported as he wrote this book during the reign of, he was put there by Nero, is what it says, not during the reign. He was put on Patmos by Nero. That's external evidence, and it's very clear evidence on the Syriac version of the Bible, of Revelation, rather. So again, that's all external evidence, and like I said, you'd have to dig deeper into this. We could do a whole show on it. Kenneth Gentry has 300 pages on it. Here, James Ellis in The Last Days Are Left Behind has a chapter, a very good chapter on that. So, again, you go back to Clement, I believe it was before 70 A.D. Ladd, George Allen Ladd, who was a futurist, right? And plenty more believe that this was written, again, with all, to be consistent, all Scripture, that we have the New Testament, and even Norman Geisler has gone back and forth, right? At one point in defending the credibility of Scripture, says it was all probably written before 70 A.D., right? And that's defending the inspiration of Scripture, and he actually said that at one point. So we have to see that all of Scripture is written prior to 70 A.D. And anything more on that, Mike? We can get into the internal evidence a little if you want.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that we could easily do a whole show on that. But again, the internal evidence, Revelation 12:1, the temple is still standing. We know the temple was destroyed in 70 A.D. by Titus and the Roman legions. And Revelation 17:10, the sixth Caesar is ruling, and Nero ruled from 54 to 68. So I think the internal evidence clearly dates Revelation at about 65. And then of course, it was later they would have mentioned the destruction of the temple. There was huge things that would be omitted if this book is really written in 95. And then I think if you look at the external evidence, it's overwhelming in favor of the early date at 65.
So again, you have to dig a little deeper into that, and we will encourage you to do that and bring up any questions. We can dig into it, but like we said, we could spend hours on this. So if you want to give us a call, 808-296-5467. And again, those things were to be done shortly, quickly. Those things were at hand. They were to come to pass shortly. So we take that literally, and we're going to get into that, which shows that these events had to have happened right away. So nothing to do with our day. Yet the principle of these judgments is eternal, right? So Jesus comes and sets things in order and shakes things up in all these different ways that we see in the book of Revelation to various individuals, various families, various communities, various churches, various nations, right? And so we have to see this eternal is principle. The principle is eternal, that this is a living principle in our day. So now, one more thing I wanted to talk on is, before we jump into it, is just the use of numbers in the book. Highly symbolic book, right? Maybe a little symbolic. I mean, you've got a sea beast that's not a giant squid, right? You've got these beasts with 7 horns. You've got all these prophetic use of language and prophetic imagery throughout the book. So you have to understand that there's different numbers. 7 is used throughout it, complete, right? 6, right? The man of sin. I mean, that you can go on and break every number down and see. 12 is very important because it's the community of God's people. 12 tribes, right, made up the Old Covenant people. 12 apostles made up the New Covenant people, the beginnings of it. So, foundation of it, really. So we have to get a hold of the use of 12, and then we'll use things like 12,000, right? You have to get a hold of the use of language. At one point it says 12,000. Well, let me just lay this out. Chapter 21 talks about 12 tribes, 12 apostles, 12 gates, and then 12,000 furlongs, right? Then we have to see the use of this word, how it is used to mean complete amount of the covenant community and who are governed by God, right? Again, Old Testament tribes, New Testament apostles. So you have in that 12 gates to the city, right? Chapter 21, I think that's verse 14. Then it says there's 12,000 furlongs. Now, it just ties so perfectly in here. Again, the prophetic language here, using these numbers to communicate a point, right? We've gone over 1,000 times, right? Throughout the Old Testament, it's not used in a literal mathematical sense. It's used in a sense to bring about, to communicate totality or completeness of something, right? The Lord owns
quality of it.
Yeah, the Lord owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. Well, He owns 1,000 first too. It's illustrating a point with numbers, right? I mean, you go on and on. Should I answer God, 1 in 1,000 times? And Job brings that question. I can't confound